We'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. Thank you very much, everyone. Lovely to see you here. This event couldn't happen without our IAB Australia Data Council, who've put a lot of effort into not only this event, but the handbook that we are publishing on Thursday, First Party Data Handbook, available to our members from Thursday. Now, we had in that handbook, and not only this event, but specifically content in that handbook, we had 18 contributing members, which is more than 50% of the council, which I'm not sure, I'm probably wrong, and that's councils, they all muck in. But for me, anyway, the councils that I steward, that's a record. And it was actually interesting to have the experience of having to edit too much content. It was a lovely problem to have. So look, thank you so much to all of them. And if you go to where the sandwiches are outside, you'll see their happy, shiny faces. Talking of big, fat, shiny faces, here's mine, a little less attractive, but welcome. So the agenda today, we've got a lot of content. We're bribing you with coffee and cake, so no one's allowed to leave. But there's plenty of good content, and it is based around that core topic of first-party data. We produced a first handbook out of the Data Council in 2020, which was sort of foundational core content. We then did a contextual targeting handbook. We've done an identifiers and ID solutions and resolution sort of handbook before Christmas last year, and then we felt that this was the topic to go for. So we're going to give you a little introduction and teaser preview to the content therein. Then we're going to see in real life a collaborative partnership being presented by Civic Data and Car Sales. And we'll take a look at privacy reforms and compliance. And then we'll jump into a representative industry panel. But before all that, thought I'd throw in some themes and considerations for you to get your juices flowing. The concept of responsible addressability, interdependent ecosystems, and cutting-edge tech. So from the work we've seen with the IABs and tech labs around Project REARC, with the deprecation of third-party cookies, the term responsible addressability has become increasingly common. And from a personal perspective, I think it's a term that's genuinely meaningful and something for us to really wrap our arms around as an industry as things progress. So we've got a little drunk on the capabilities of addressability in the last few years, really desperately trying to target consumers on a one-to-one basis, wherever, however, whatever, in whatever environment. And it did disrupt a lot of the more traditional business models that we know of, and it was all done with the best intentions. But through the sort of hazy hangover of what we've been up to, we've realized that we've had to grow up a little bit. And that, for me, has been a bit of a theme, the concept of being more responsible about how we approach addressability. So that is almost a dichotomy, right, in terms of the innovation and creativity, in terms of what you're trying to achieve for marketers and the capabilities to give them the results that they seek, but also the increased responsibility of just growing up as an industry and realizing the importance of adhering to consumer privacy and building for that. It's that dichotomy and that sort of balance between two ends is the bits, for me personally, that I think is when the industry is at their very best. So when there's the art meeting the science, or how you see the tension between SSPs and DSPs, and we've got that now in the same way with that concept of responsible addressability. So I just think it's something just to pull out as a core theme. I think it's going to be increasingly important. And then this is actually a visualization of the internet. It's like one of those data is beautiful kind of things that I grabbed and made up or whatever. This is the internet. So, you know, the interconnectivity of just connected servers or machines or people, however you want to look at it, it is naturally interconnected, right? We've known that since the beginning. But increasingly, I suppose, the fears around, particularly in relation to first-party data, and particularly in relation to that concept of addressability, the fear around what we call closed or private ecosystems, otherwise known as walled gardens, that sort of federation increasing even more as media owners and buyers look after their own audiences, increasingly become a little more protective, may have some little second-party shared relationships, And some of those cul-de-sacs that you kind of see in terms of traffic or human behavior, it feels like it's less interdependent and less connected, and that is a concern. But when you throw privacy and the consumer privacy requirements, particularly in the way that it's got to be plumbed and the way that consent has to be adhered to and respected throughout the consumer journey wherever there are, suddenly you do genuinely become interdependent. Because it's becoming increasingly likely that as things evolve, and there is variance, and we'll hear that from the privacy guys, as I'm calling them over there, which is hardly the right term. Anyway, privacy and compliance guys, is that more glamorous? Probably not. That the consumer's preferences in one part of the ecosystem within the universe will have to be adhered to consistently and persistently in others. So whether that's in what we call the open internet or whether that's in private ecosystems. So the plumbing and the consistency has to be there. And the platforms are being built for that in terms of the plumbing and the specifications. There are two which will be coming out for that. One is out in draft version from Tech Lab, and there's another to come. One is for your legislation in terms of wherever you are, whether that's country, territory, region, or kind of type of approach, really. It's pretty flexible. And the second one is in terms of wherever you are as a consumer, the global accountability platform. And the other one is known as the global privacy platform. So bear that in mind. Philosophically, to me, it feels interesting that with the privacy requirements as they're evolving, we actually become more interdependent than just interconnected. I think there'll be a change. If anyone saw the news recently about YouTube, they're opening up, right? It was always going to happen. You might say, in personal view, that it's something that's been forced a little sooner than would happen organically, but it's still symbolic. So just bear that in mind as a trend or key theme. And then lastly, cutting-edge technologies. So we have, in our intro section, we'll have Rick from InfoSum giving us an explainer around clean rooms. And this is a type of privacy-enhancing technology which we're going to see more and more coming through in the forms of AI automated improvements for efficiency and effectiveness, or how we attribute and how we measure. There's lots of projects underway around genuine cutting-edge tech. So we get very excited in digital marketing about how very clever we are, but we're still using random text files that we drop onto hard drives of computers, which we've been doing for the last 25 years, because they're going away for third-party connectivity. We're having a big panic. It's not actually particularly cutting edge. What they've been doing in finance, health, insurance, around actually managing and touching private, sensitive data without actually touching it, as it were, and yet pulling out actual insights is generally cutting edge, and the industry's starting to realize we're going to have to get our hands dirty with those types of technologies. So for me, that's another theme that I'm super excited about. Right, so that's my little preamble. And if I could have my very competent, willing helpers to come up, Ewan and Rick, thank you so much. Give them a round of applause. So we're just going to give you, whet your appetites with some of the content that's coming up from the handbook. And this is a selection of the sort of content that we've gone for. And I think it's, I suppose there's a lot there that you'd expect. We've tried really hard to ensure there's good foundational explainers and definitions, which is always important and hard to get away from. Case studies, we've got quite a wide range from big foundational members that have been around for a long time, and brand new members like XPON, where we have Leo from XPON. There he is at the back. He's tired because, like me, he was watching the Socceroos this morning, who got through to the World Cup. But interesting breadth of case studies that we hope all marketers and all members will find interesting. And we've tried to put in some of those future developments as we see them, whether they're slightly sort of product-based, as one might expect from some of the bigger vendors, some of the bigger pubs and buy side, and also just some of those specifications I was talking about earlier, introduction to the initial specs and also those to come. It's hard to not get away from just redefining some of the stuff that I know you know, but that's an obligation. I really do like when it comes to categorizing, and we do have a whole range of definitions, by the way, for you when it comes to what is first-party data. But I do like the way the Trade Desk have categorized it here, and that will be available in the book and others like it, just in terms of Whether it's CRM data, loyalty data, user-generated signals through analytics. I quite like the way it sits into those 4 types. And yes, the last point around consent and consent management is that here in Australia, as the privacy conversations evolve and mature, and what the consumer experience of that is, let alone just adhering to those consent signals, we actually have an onus on us as an industry to really lean into the conversation. So the way that we're engaging with the ACCC on transparency, for instance, and the way that Sarah and others have been liaising directly with the government, various departments that are dealing with this, it's going to be down to us in terms of what it looks like. And the specifications and tools can enable us in that way to take the approach that we want. And we've got the learnings and pains from other markets, such as Europe, with this kind of experience, what's happening in the US with different types of approaches. Sounds a bit selfish, but to be honest, let the pain continue a little longer while we have a little bit of a runway, which you'll hear from the others, because we can only learn from their experiences. Sounds slightly cruel, but it's true. All right, that's me done. I'm handing over to Yun. Here's your clicker. You can use whatever you like. Thank you very much. The big green arrow.
I'll just use this. Okay. Good morning. Okay, it is on. All right, my name is Yun and I'm from Foxcatcher. I'm the General Manager. We are an Australian data and tech company. I have to try not to walk around. We're an Australian data and tech company, and one of the key things that we do is to make the application of data simple. And just keeping in mind that when I say application of data, everything that we do at Foxcatcher is compliant and respectful to consumers, which is, I think, why we are here today to talk about how to do that properly and how to do it well with first-party data. Okay, you'll be pleased to know too that I have one slide. All right, so before we kick off, can I get a show of hands, just being curious, who's a marketer in here? Are there any marketers in room? Excellent. Any publishers? Perfect. Okay, so Foxcatcher works with marketers, we work with publishers, we also work with the agencies who help the marketers and publishers do a much better job when we think about data and the activation and application of it. So, for those marketers and publishers, who knows your customers or your visitors to site the most? I would say it's you, right? So in the last few months, what we have actually found is we have been having conversations with marketers and publishers as well as our agency folks, has been the need and the want to use first-party data better. There has been some use of it, but there is definitely a much deeper and richer way of engaging with your audience. So, the second point is around the customer value piece of things. When there is a compliant use of first-party data, there are many things that you can actually try to understand and also learn from the data that is already yours, as well as your customers and the visitors to your site. Customer lifetime value, consumer path to purchase, these are just a couple of different things that a lot of the marketers as well as publishers are already doing. One of the key things that is important out of these will be a much more personalised and interactive way of discussing with your customers and understanding what they would actually like to hear from you. All of a sudden, there is a much deeper customer value exchange between brand as well as consumer. One of the things that we do at Foxcatcher is to marry first-party data with machine learning to have a couple of different outcomes. We have actually hired someone by the name of Chi. She is quite amazing. My brain melted a little bit when I tried to ask her what she does. She has her master's in mathematics, and all she does is think about different ways of building smarter algorithm to apply first-party data in a different as well as a better way. There are two key things that we do with first-party data. One of that is propensity modeling. So propensity modeling is done via a tag that we drop onto our customer's site or onto a publisher's site. What this tag allows us to do is collect first-party data, but the machine learning allows us to understand for every customer that comes onto your site, what is the likelihood for them to convert? So given we are in a Teachers Federation venue today for an education segment client, what we will be able to see is for any person who comes onto the site, what is the likelihood of them actually enrolling? What is the likelihood of them actually registering interest in a particular course? For any e-com client, we perform RFM modeling, also known as recency, frequency, monetary modeling, and this ties a few different factors together. How often do you need to see an ad? How many days between the first ad and the fifth ad, as an example, as well as the cart value that is actually attached to it. So this is just a richer way of utilizing first-party data to understand how to speak to your customers differently. The other outcome that we have, which a lot of our customers have now taken on board, is the true outcome of what you can get through propensity as well as RFM modeling. So every time we drop a Fox tag onto a site or onto a brand site, what is also done is a Fox ID is being generated. So what we are now able to do is to leverage first-party data and have a segment of audience that has been bucketed into different value. As an example, for propensity, you'll be able to see audiences who are low, medium, or high value. E-com clients get a lot more interesting because now you can start thinking about these different segment audiences, and there are 9 of them. From those who aren't interested to about a 4th or 5th tier who are those with potential, and then those in the top tier who are that of the champions. So imagine if you have all of these different data and to be able to activate differently and have a different way of understanding and engaging with your audience just based around what they already are telling you. So as an example, when you think about prospecting, what is a more powerful way of prospecting than using evidence-led approach? There is evidence based around the machine learning that we have used that these particular audiences do fall into medium and high. You may choose to build lookalike audiences accordingly. You may also choose to suppress all of the low-value segment audiences. The other thing that you may be able to do through propensity modeling and the audience bucket that we have helped you build may also be to think about your search bidding strategy differently. Probably bid against the higher value audiences and potentially, again, suppressing those of the lower value audiences. What is even more exciting with the likes of RFM modeling, I mentioned about 9 different segments, will be to start to mimic what a champion segment marketing strategy could look like. For example, if you already know that the champions see the ad 5 times and within the window of 7 days, and know the cart value that's actually attached, you can now start to switch up your marketing strategy to move someone from a potential to a champion. What is also super exciting for us is we have also just released RFM Plus, and this allows anyone with an e-com capability to look into 7, 14, and 60 days window and think about and actually have a clear understanding of what your likely sales could actually be. Now, this is just all through first-party data as well as algorithm. But ultimately, what this drives, whether you're an e-com client, an education client, or in the government sector, or any other categories out there, is return on investment. So we believe, and we actually see a future where every data point is actionable, and it is already here, and it is already possible. So I suppose the final point that we can, that I would like to leave with the group today is that actionable data and insights based off first-party data is one that is safe, compliant, but ultimately one that improves the customer value exchange between a brand, a publisher, as well as the consumer. So that's it, the one slide, and I hope this has been helpful around how to actually apply first-party data. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Richard Knott, General Manager excuse me, of InfoSum for Australia and New Zealand. And I'm here today to talk to you about data clean rooms. Okay, so what is a data clean room? Well, this is definitely not a stupid question. As with a lot of these kind of technologies that appear quite quickly over a couple of year period, no one really sits down and designs exactly what it is. It's kind of, that's done in retrospect after it's created. So it's definitely not a stupid question. I mean, technically today, if you know how to merge two Excel files together and run some kind of script to look for matches, you could call yourself a data clean room. It is kind of that broad and open. However, obviously that is not the promise of data clean rooms. That's not what they're about. The mission statement, if you like, of data clean rooms is, as our COO said, the future is not a privacy-safe ID, it's making ID privacy-safe. That doesn't mean privacy-safe IDs aren't important, but we have an opportunity here with a rise in privacy legislation and with the deprecation of cookies to really think about how we're doing things with data and how we're working to make it far more fundamentally secure than it has been in the past. You say, well, that's not really telling me what it is, so let's have a crack at it here. A private, secure and governed environment for two or more parties to bring data together for analysis, matching, planning, activating and measurement. That's a general overview of what a data clean room does. So to give that sort of life, think of it this way. There's two companies or people in the market who have a very strong opinion on how that data should be used. So think of it as, on one side you've got companies, you've got brands. They want to operate within an environment that is entirely protected and entirely trustworthy. You know, the dirty secret of first-party data sharing at the moment is it's not a lot of it going on because companies don't trust each other. It doesn't matter how reputable you are as a company, there's just the risk of what could possibly go wrong versus the potential rewards is just too great. And then on the other side, you have consumers. As we know, consumers are growing in their understanding of privacy and understanding of their digital identity. And they are asking, where is my data? Who's using my data? What are they using it for? Can anyone work that back to me as an individual that I haven't consented for them to do that? These two demands that are sitting there in market, what data clean rooms are trying to do is create an ability for those two demands to still come together and still to be able to collaborate. Now, there's many, as I said, there's a bit of a wild west out there in data clean rooms at the moment, so there's many ways you can cut how many types of data clean rooms there are. The way I like to bucket it is in three groups. So the first group is an ecosystem or a walled garden data clean room. So this is where you can take your data set, you can give it to another party, say a walled garden like a Facebook or Google, and in their data clean room you can match your data set against their data set and they will give you some kind of results. An ecosystem version of that is if you and a partner that you want to match with are using the same data warehouse, that data warehouse can build out a data clean room for you, and then within that same infrastructure you can match your data sets. If you want to use a third party for whatever reason, for example, if you're not using the same data warehouse, the first generation or centralized data clean rooms are out there. And what they do is you take two data sets, you bring them together, and you commingle them, and you create a match rate, and you get some kind of result or insight out of that. And then finally, the latest type, decentralized or second generation data clean rooms. The way these are different is rather than taking two data sets and putting them in a data clean room, the data clean room comes to you. So your data set stays exactly where it is. The data clean room sits within your infrastructure. and then a UI will run queries across your data set. It will create a mathematical representation of that data set, and then it will use various tools like Bloom filters to match those mathematical representations against each other. The benefits of this is, yes, data doesn't move around, which is a big concern for consumers. It also means that no one has access to your raw data. Therefore, there's no need for commercial trust. It's what's called a zero trust framework. And you can now enable multi-partner matching. So multi-data sets all matched together within the one experience. So what are some of the benefits of data clean rooms? I'm not going to go through this slide in too much detail, but essentially think of it like this. You simply take all of your raw data assets, whatever you have, across wherever you have them, and you can place them in what we call a bunker, but other companies call them something else. But this is the infrastructure that sits within your infrastructure. And then you can use that to run all kinds of insights, such as single customer view across all those data sources, customer overlap, all of those kind of things. And then you can work with other data partners within that ecosystem, and you can collaborate on that data and match against that data. Finally, if you want to then run a marketing campaign, you can reach out to media companies and you can ask for their first-party data, and you can match against their first-party data. And then you can tell them which particular identifiers you want to target, but you don't have to tell them why. You can say it could be your lapsed customers, it could be current customers, it could be people that have never used your product. You just give them a list of their own IDs back to them, and then they run their campaign against that. So some use cases, again, not going to go into too much detail on these today. Some of them are pretty obvious. Insights, such as single customer view, customer overlap, etc. The ability to plan on those insights and create activations against them. And then to measurement. Measurement's an area that's growing for data clean rooms, but that's certainly coming and certainly important. But the only one I'm going to linger on a little bit is onboarding, because this is the sexy bit, if you like, about data clean rooms and what you can do. You can essentially make yourself your own walled garden. You can make your own data ecosystem. So what do I mean by that? Think of it a little bit like this. So imagine you're a manufacturer of running shoes. You can have data partnerships with retailers that you work with, gym networks, maybe you sponsor sporting teams, and you can have data partnerships with them for their fans. And you can create an entire ecosystem of matching data and sharing insights within that environment. You can enrich further with other data enrichment vendors, and you can bring in some of their insights. And as I mentioned, you can work with identity partners to create onboarding solutions. So you can increase the amount of match rate that you're having and also onboard offline data. And then, as I said, match ultimately with media companies to then run marketing campaigns against those insights. So who are the big users of data clean rooms in other markets? Well, a little bit of a shopping list here, but as you can understand, there are sort of two main commonalities between these users. One is they either have a lot of first-party data or they're leaning heavily into first-party data that as a really important thing for their future. And the second one is they're either very privacy conscious or very careful with who they're sharing their data with, because either they have to, because they're a bank or something, or because they've been burnt in the past, like gaming with Sony PlayStation and the like. They are the biggest users of data clean rooms at the moment. But how much is this really beginning to affect their day-to-day lives of managing advertising campaigns? Well, we asked Boots to do a little bit of a review. Boots is a UK pharmacy, high street pharmacy. We asked them to do a little bit of a review of how much they're using. They said a few years ago, about 7% of our media was bought using first-party data. Now it's around 30%, but some campaigns are closer to 40%. So as we see overseas, this way of operating within this data clean room ecosystem is just growing and growing and growing and getting more important for people. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So thank you, Ewan. Thank you, Rick. Let's have a safe flight, Ewan. It's going back to sunny Melbourne, or not back. Although it is sort of back for you, isn't it? Right. thank you very much. That's a little opener. It's a bit of a teaser for some of the content that you'll find in the handbook on Thursday. As mentioned, we do have some case studies in there from a whole range of our members, and we thought it would be important to have sort of a visualization of that coming to you live and direct in real life. So I'd like to welcome Stephen from Car Sales and Chris from Civic Data to come up and talk through their collaborative partnership. I'm particularly excited by some of the new words. I like commingling and bunkers. That was good. Some more terms there for us to get excited about. Right, good luck, chaps.
What microphoning system do we use here?
We use the handheld mics, and let's have a look. Turn it on. There's a little secret button at the bottom, if I remember. There we go. You ready to rock? And
Hello.
great. There we go.
Great.
Thanks in advance.
This is the clicker here.
Big green button.
Big green button. Terrific. Okay. Bit of background on Civic Data, just quickly. It started 10 months ago, but I probably spent about 2 years researching the upcoming problems when it comes to privacy, compliance, what's happening with cookie deprecation, etc. So my background is planning and buying media for 10 years on the advertising side, digital media. Then I spent 5 years in the US, where I opened the office for the first tag management system called Tagman. And through that, obviously I dropped a hell of a lot of cookies on people, but I also got to meet a lot of people that were starting programmatic businesses, starting analytics businesses. They were starting all sorts of businesses that use these cookies and tags to track people, which is a word that Apple like to use at the moment, don't they? Unless they talk about their own business. They won't talk about tracking, they'll talk about personalization. But if you want the data, it's tracking. So what we did with Civic Data was I went out and found some very smart marketing technologists, people who are full stack developers, people who are insights experts, people who can understand these new technologies that I researched from the US, who've dealt with CCPA, who've dealt with the incoming 5 new patchwork state laws, because there is no federal legislation for privacy over in the US yet. People who've dealt with GDPR, and they've launched businesses to solve for these problems or to find some kind of workaround that's compliant. So Civic Data, in short, is all about compliant growth. How do we help a marketer and a publisher to continue to grow their business, to grow their revenue, but in a compliant fashion? Everything else, if you want to know, it's on the LinkedIn page. So if you follow Civic Data, one thing that we do is, actually put your hands up. Who has actually read the discussion paper for the Privacy Act changes? Okay, put your hands down. Keep them up, keep them up. Put your hands down if you're a publisher. Put your hands down now if you're a marketer. Okay, great. So who put a submission forward with their, that's a lot less, isn't it? Okay, and who here is involved in privacy? Exactly. So we did put forward a submission paper, which I'm happy to share with you, or if you just go research it, just search Civic Data on those submitted. Okay, I'm going to quickly go forward then. We're talking here about first-party data ID solutions. Now, we heard earlier on from Richard how identity there is part of the clean room conversation. Everyone is looking at CDP at the moment. If you're not, you probably should. I'm going to move quickly from DMP here. The whole point here is about moving from what was this cookie-based kind of third-party story to a sophisticated, owned, first-party customer data hub. The way I like to think about it in my mind is it's not a customer data platform, it's a compliant data platform. How can you attach consent to everyone within that platform that you have? But if you don't know who that person is that's in your customer data platform, how do you actually recognize them across devices, across browsers, to stay true to that consent that they gave you? If someone opts out on Firefox, but then come back in later on a different browser, Chrome, on a different device, and you start following them around for a horrible message, they're going to get pretty pissed off. So identity is absolutely core to everything you do when it comes to using customer data. And it's also core to consent when you start talking about consent platforms in the future. I won't go on too much about the tightening of the privacy side, but obviously the necessity is there now. And it's not just now about owning and storing that first-party data. It's about how can you activate and control that data across your entire ecosystem in a compliant way, which is what we're going to talk about in a second with Stephen and car sales. So we look at it like the hub between the spokes. This is the center of your entire universe. It feeds everything. It feeds your research, your R&D, your partnerships, your in-store partnerships as well. It's not just about the online advertising that people see. It's that part where the customer experience layer, where you interact between the two. So your customer is interacting with you on email, interacting with you on screen, different devices. That's the part where you want to feed and feed the knowledge to that interaction. So why has it become part of CDP planning? CDPs can do ID resolution, but only if they have an ID passed to it. They are not an ID solution in itself. They do not generate an ID for you. Richard, do you have your own? You don't have your own ID solution, right? So the ID is so imperative for understanding who that customer is and activating that data. They're not fit for purpose. They're not owned. Basically, the CDP is not a privacy-preserving technology. The ID management solution, if you are choosing one, must be resettable. If you want to reset the ID, it has to be owned by you guys. It has to be first party. It has to be compliant. And this is an important piece. How do you bridge the anonymous and known customers? So authenticated versus non-authenticated traffic should be a major conversation in this industry right now. One of the biggest problems I think we're all aware with here is the lack of unauthenticated knowledge of visitors that come to publishers, as one example. So I'm going to go here and move on to Stephen. But the point is, how do we move now from we own X amount of identities to how many addressable identities we have? If you've got a massive database of, let's say, 10 million IDs, but you can't actually address them in any way, or if they're not compliant, it's pretty much worth shit all at the moment. Sorry, we're live streaming this, aren't we? Sorry. Okay. So how do we actually do that? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly touch on it first, and then Stephen, you can just jump in. On the right-hand side here, in red, is your advertiser. On the left-hand side here is the publisher. In the middle is your unauthenticated user, someone who hasn't actually logged in, someone who hasn't actually said, I am Joe Bloggs. Now, down at the bottom, you've got clean room functionality as an example, right? So you might be using a clean room or some type of clean room functionality. But on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, you'll see there's two keywords, internal platforms. Internal platforms could mean anything. It could mean CDP, could mean data lake, could mean whatever platform you want to pass that ID to. But what we're doing here is looking at a way to actually use two advertiser and two sets, so one partner publisher, one partner advertiser, to start to pass and match IDs across in a compliant fashion, but doing it in an unauthenticated way as well as an authenticated way as well. And I'll pass to Stephen to actually explain it.
A lot of theory from young Chris here. I guess what I'm here for is maybe the more practical aspects of it, what we've actually done as Chris talks about what's possible. We've executed this, so we've implemented an ID solution. And this was a very big part of our strategy because we knew that it wasn't enough to just have a CDP. CDP is not an ID solution, but of course it's a central piece of governance and orchestration technology that's going to drive your business going forwards in the future. So the ID solution that we went with is what's here called AdFixus, and having that first party ID was critical. And I'll give you two practical examples. CDP vendors, of which there's a few here, actually price their CDPs based on user profiles. So if you don't have an ID solution that's durable and is first party, purely from a practical perspective, you're going to pay a lot of money for crap. So I think take a step back and think about an ID solution before you do anything else, because that's going to be the first party cookie that stitches your users, your visitors across your network. And for car sales, we don't just sell cars, we sell bikes, we sell boats, we sell trucks. And so we've got a whole network, and that cross-domain capability to stitch users across our domain in a first-party context was a key ID solution that we needed. Feeding that all into the CDP, and now we have a first-party data set based on cookies that we can activate in an unauthenticated partnerships in a data clean room. So that's the first element of practically what comes out of having an ID solution. And then, of course, there's the cost management that comes with your CDPs. And those, to me, are probably the two key messages I wanted to leave you with is you have those components, you can do the first-party matching and activation, and, of course, there's a cost management component to it. What this means in terms of enabling compliant growth, outside of all the words which you can read by yourselves, is for us, if I look at it practically, if you look at the three macro challenges, which is, of course, third-party cookie deprecation, whatever Apple is doing, whatever Apple does, eventually, ad revenue for them goes up, everybody else's go down, make of that what you will. And, of course, privacy legislation, whatever the government's going to do. All of those things need to be managed at the same time to create compliant partnerships. So you need, the need for the CDP is where that governance framework comes in, and your ability to know, as Chris was saying, exactly what's going on with each user downstream and how you manage that. What comes out of that is compliant partnerships in two sets. Of course, the first-party cookie partnerships and the PII-based partnerships, which I think InfoSerm as well mentioned, in terms of how you get that data together and create matching and activation outcomes. So with the infrastructure in place, you are then able to execute compliant partnerships respecting privacy, and we all need to get our heads around this, but really be able to drive marketing outcomes at scale. And I think for me, those are the two key elements and practical strategies that we're doing to see past all those three macro challenges and remain compliant.
Okay. So one thing that, if anyone wants it, we've just put together a white paper on how to explain to your C-suite these problems, which I'm sure any of you in that kind of area of speaking to the executives in your business about marketing technology, you're finding it hard to do. So one of our kind of key phrases is that the marketing team never studied law, and the compliance and legal team haven't got a clue about MarTech. One of the core challenges that everyone here may be aware of, and it's been discussed a lot around the IAB, are the technical terms that will come under scrutiny with the update to the privacy regulations. So what will be considered information that can identify someone and that can get you in trouble. So one of the core challenges you'll find is if you don't understand, if you're a marketer, what technologies are collecting data across your entire website and that customer experience layer that we mentioned earlier on, you could fall well foul of that law should changes come in. So that's one area, if you're not focusing at the moment, you should be focusing, is how to explain to the executive level, we need to look at privacy as an opportunity. We need to start looking at this as a way to get across all of our customers, ensure they all understand how we're using their data, get across all of our tags we're using that are collecting that data, and make sure every single one of them will stand up under scrutiny. So there is a white paper I could send you, guys, that you can send to your teams that helps explain that. But the key thing here is the compliance isn't a bottleneck, right? So it is something which you should be grabbing onto now. I think the fact that Stephen's up here now talking about how he can work with pretty much anyone here who wants to go and start to advertise to people in a compliant way if they're not ready themselves. Stephen's done that work, and he's actually got on top of it. So in a year's time, let's say when everyone else is scrambling around, he's well ahead of the game on that piece. And I think that's the key conversation here, is how can you start to look at all of your technologies and identity attached to that data and make sure the entire stack is compliant, but look at it in a good way as well. The last point there, if you look at CCPA and what's happening in America, if you look at GDPR, is anyone here from Europe? Okay. So did you all receive, when GDPR starting, like 1 month before it came into effect, everyone got 20 emails at once or 30 emails at once saying we'd love to keep a relationship with you even though we haven't spoken to you in 7 years? So if you look at the sample size of Australia, it's a tiny amount of people here. If everyone suddenly has to have permission to keep that data on file, everyone's going to be getting 60, 70 emails at the same time. So if you start your conversation now, you're not going to be lost in that massive kind of snowball of emails that happen for permission later on. So that's one thing to take away from here. Let's get ahead of it. That's it. Yeah. Any questions, I guess?
Excellent. Thank you. Now, I just want to check if there are any questions. Okay. I mean, I suppose, I must admit, oh, hang on, we do have one. You have to shout, sorry.
Who are you? Sorry.
We do not know who you are. We do.
What are your principles around how you are trying to, I'm trying to phrase the question, sorry. Are you trying to pursue more people logging in, or are you trying to pursue actively not doing so? Because I think a lot of the stuff always, we focus the discussion around technology, not necessarily what are our overarching principles around how we are looking at privacy. So yeah. I've been participating in doing that and pushing people to log in to watch content. Fine, it's worked, it's been very good for us. But is that a sustainable path moving forward? Is this just because the conversation around technology, ID replacements, it's still the same thing?
Yeah.
It's an ID that a person who's just a normal human being is not going to feel super comfortable with, regardless of whether it's opt-in or not.
So just for the benefit of those online, it sounds like the question's around, in terms of the partnerships and the audience you seek, whether it's just sheer scale or if there's a qualitative aspect to that. In terms of the relationship you wish to form?
Look, it's a very practical question because it's it's something that we've thought about as well. Where we've landed, it's both, Josh, because of course there's always going to be levels of execution, and the logged-in experience is a level of execution, and it gives you a certain level of capability, of interaction, of targeting that you're then going to do, and the level of and the consent that's going to come with that. But you cannot ignore the unauthenticated person as well, because the reality is that's going to be the vast percentage of the audience that's going to come to the site. So I think it's both, and then that's why that first-party ID solution is important, because the two things then don't separate. You do need the consent framework that's going to manage that first-party cookie, and it's now in a first-party context. And what I often talk about, one of the unintended consequences of the deprecation of the third-party cookie is things like what me and you are allowed to do. We have a first-party trusted relationship with our customers. If we create the user experience in such a way that it respects us, of course there's going to be a consent. Consent is going to be given. So we are within every right to do that. But actually, the dependency has actually been on the third-party cookie to execute that. Now, we're big supporters. It was madness and it needs to go. That's a good thing for publishers. But it's both. If you get that first-party cookie in, you can then execute those first-party partnerships with whoever is in that frame, which is going to be the vast majority. But absolutely, there is the logged-in experience that's also going to be very important. So it has to be both, and there will be marketing outcomes driven by both of those things. And you do have to be thinking about what's the consent framework and what's the governance model for both of those things.
Excellent. That is a fantastic answer to a good question. Thank you very much. We are moving on to the next segment. Thank you to Stephen from Carsales, Chris from Civic Data. And look, you can see those fluffy themes there, a bit of interdependence, a bit of responsible addressability. Right, so next up we move to Sophie and Sarah, who I very unkindly presented as the privacy guys. Sorry about that. I have to rebrand you somehow. So please come up, and we're going to look into an incredibly important topic. Sarah and Sophie, give the guys a round of applause. Those two should be on.
Thank you, JJ, and hi everyone. And a massive thank you as well to my co-presenter today, Sophie Dawson, who is a partner at Bird & Bird and a privacy law expert, and who has taken time out from a number of pieces of litigation to be with us today. So thank you, Sophie. So today we are going to be talking about looking ahead to the next round of privacy reforms and future-proofing compliance strategies. Excellent, the clicker works. So we have a packed 20 minutes. First, I'll hand over to Sophie to talk about the current state of play, so laws that are in place now and enforcement standards and trends and what's happening in the real world. And then I'll talk about what lies ahead in terms of privacy law reform. And finally, I will hand back to Sophie to talk about how organisations can plan for change and future-proof their compliance strategies. So over to you, Sophie. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. What an exciting time for people to be doing the jobs that you're all doing. You're in the eye of multiple changes, of which obviously privacy laws are only one. There's the change in the law, there's the change in the regulator's approach, there's the change in technology, there's the change in consumer expectations, and all of those things are obviously happening all at once. So it's a pleasure to be talking to you about just one aspect of that change today. Have we got the clicker? The clicker. So I'm going to talk to you quickly about the current state of play, just for 5 minutes, and then hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk to you about what lies ahead before we get to the practical compliance strategies. As all of you know at the moment, we've got 13 Australian privacy principles, we've got the Spam Act, and Section 18 of the Australian Consumer Law has also become a lot more important. So for those who are not familiar with it, essentially Section 18 prohibits misleading or deceptive conduct in trade or commerce. And what's happened is, instead of just having two regulators to deal with in the marketing space, being the Privacy Commissioner and the ACMA, now the ACCC, the competition regulator, has become very active as well. So what we're seeing is a lot more compliance activity than used to be the case 10 years ago, so an enforcement activity. So you can see that through the Privacy Commissioner's cases against Facebook and against Clearview. So in the full federal court recently found that the Privacy Commissioner could serve proceedings on Facebook's foreign entity because it was it had established a prima facie case that Facebook was carrying on business in Australia. In Clearview, the Commissioner found that a business that essentially was using AI to process images of people's faces collected across the world, including Australia, was breaching their APPs because it was collecting information in Australia, including photos, which was sensitive information without people's consent. So some of the change has already happened. The bar has risen in terms of regulator expectations, the amount of enforcement, as well as those other changes we've been hearing about in terms of the technology, in terms of the practices of Apple and others, and also in terms of consumer expectations. Part of the change is obviously this change from cookies to first-party data. That changes the privacy scenario as well under the existing laws, because under the existing laws, third-party cookies left open some arguments about what is and isn't personal information that aren't as readily available in a first-party data scenario. But we'll talk about a little bit of that at the end of this talk. First, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to tell you a little bit about what lies ahead. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sophie. And that's really interesting to hear about. You know, there's law reform and then there's sort of changes that are already happening by the enforcement agencies as well. So that's important to bear in mind. So we've, I'll just, sorry, just trying to click through. Perfect. So we've heard a lot about imminent privacy law reforms, and people have mentioned it today as well. So in this part, I will talk through the regulatory context in Australia and overseas and how that will impact the law reform process, what to expect in terms of timing and changes from here, and also some key issues being considered in the process that could impact on digital advertising. So in terms of the regulatory context in Australia, you might be wondering what's likely to happen to the law reform process given we've just had a change in government. So while privacy isn't an immediate priority for the new government compared to things like energy and cost of living and the budget, privacy law reform is unfortunately unlikely to slow down. And in fact could be an increased area of focus for the government. So the significant work done by the Attorney General's Department is expected to be delivered to the new Attorney General, to Mark Dreyfus, soon, and it'll probably happen on the same timetable as what the previous government was doing. So he should receive that report from the department around about now. The Attorney General has been an advocate of strong privacy laws in the past, and so things like he's been an advocate for a privacy cause of action and other things like that. So the job of industry certainly won't be any easier under this government. So privacy law won't be going away anytime soon in terms of reforms that are expected. And once the immediate priorities are done, we can expect it to sort of speed up from there. Where we could see a change in approach is the Online Privacy Code. So some of you will remember that prior to the election, the former government was pretty keen to legislate to allow for the Online Privacy Code for social media, data brokers and large online platforms. And large online platforms was then defined as any company with over 2.5 million users annually. And it was also keen to include increased penalties for privacy law breaches across the digital economy as a matter of urgency. And so they wanted to do that before the changes around the full Privacy Act review would be introduced. So that's probably less likely to happen now, particularly the Online Privacy Code, given that Labor were really critical in opposition of pushing that through without proper consultation on the issues. So that's a bit of good news there. Another important factor that will influence our privacy law reform process will of course be what's happening internationally. Mostly, of course, these developments have seen the tide turning in favour of increased privacy protection. So, for example, in California, there's been criticism over their Privacy Act, which has led to the development of a new Privacy Rights Act due to come into effect next year, which will introduce things like expanded rights for consumer access to data and the ability to delete personal data, a right of access to information about automated decision-making, and a right of data portability, so to ensure that consumers can transfer their data to other businesses, which is something that for our industry this government will be looking at as well. And there have also been proposals you might have heard in the US around a proposed ban on behavioural advertising, so an outright ban altogether, as well as an overarching federal privacy law. So these, I think, are probably less likely to come into effect anytime soon in the US, if at all. The laws have been drafted, but there's a lot of roadblocks to those actually being implemented in legislation. So that's the US. In the EU, the GDPR is also evolving, and the example I really wanted to highlight in particular is the UK, which seems to be going against the tide in a way and looking for an approach to privacy that's more business and innovation friendly, and in particular post-Brexit. So currently in the UK, the law there effectively reflects the GDPR, but the UK government has indicated that they support changes to allow low-risk processing activities that are in line with individuals' expectations. So things like network security, product safety and measurement and analytics. And the idea is that this would give organisations greater confidence that certain legitimate data processing purposes are within the scope of the law. And while these changes haven't been implemented, legislation is expected to be introduced soon in the UK to actually give effect to that. So that's kind of the context in summary, and all of these changes and developments will be taken into account by our government when they eventually put forward a final set of proposals to be introduced in Australia as well. In terms of timing of privacy reform, so I really wanted to sort of point out that even if we end up with a fast-moving law reform process, don't expect changes to be implemented within a year. So it's more likely to kind of take between a year and 2 years, or, that's probably a safe bet. So as I mentioned earlier, AGD are in the process of finalising their review and providing the report to the Attorney-General. The government will then need to respond to the report and any recommendations and indicate whether they agree or disagree. There'll then be a process of developing and consulting on draft legislation before it then is expected to pass the Parliament. So quite a few steps to go, and at least 12 months from here. In terms of what to expect from the final outcome, there's been a lot of talk about implementing GDPR in Australia, and I just wanted to point out that's a bit of a myth, or at least a generalisation. So the reform process here is likely to build on what's in place under our current Privacy Act, and so far that's what's been put forward by government is more of a combined approach in the discussion paper. So certainly some aspects of GDPR are being considered, but so are reforms from other jurisdictions. So while we still don't know what the final changes will be, I think it's fairly safe to say it won't be as simple as transplanting the GDPR into Australian law. Having said that, I might just... So having said that, the general direction of the review seems to be for higher and more prescriptive obligations in terms of how the law applies to online and in specific contexts. So the general idea is a shift in responsibility to organisations rather than expecting consumers to understand, read and consent to detailed privacy policies. Greater consumer choice and control, for example, through easy access. Sorry, just lost my little... Yeah, greater consumer choice and control, so access to privacy default settings and that sort of thing. And also new obligations for children. So there currently aren't any specific obligations for children under our existing Privacy Act, So consideration's been given to whether there should be specific obligations for both children and young people, children, young people and vulnerable consumers as well, to sort of give them a bit more protection. And it's sort of worth noting the GDPR and the California legislation have protections for children as well. So, and finally, increased penalties. So to bring the privacy law remedies basically in line with existing consumer and competition remedies, we can definitely expect to see those. But the question really is of the timing on those. Will the government rush those through a bit sooner than other Privacy Act reforms, or can we see those sort of rolled into the broader process? So in terms of some of the key reforms being considered that would impact the industry, the review's discussion paper really is jam-packed, but I just wanted to mention a few in the limited time that we have that IAB has focused on as an industry body. So first of all, we've heard a bit about it today, the changes to the definition of personal information. There have been a number of drafting changes that have been proposed that the review has put forward, essentially to make it clearer that digital identifiers and inferred information can be personal information. But of course, that's already the case under the current law when it's linked with or stored with other personal information that actually or reasonably identifies a person. So what seems to be the bigger issue in practice is determining at what point data becomes personal information in particular circumstances and what point a person becomes reasonably identifiable. But as a number of privacy law experts have indicated, there are real concerns around, the proposed changes that are put forward wouldn't actually make it any clearer at what point someone is reasonably identifiable, but would rather just increase the scope of data that is captured under the privacy law. So obligations would attach to a wider range of data than what it does now if these changes go through. So that's one to watch. The second proposal that could have a significant impact on industry that I wanted to talk about is this new overarching obligation that all collections, uses and disclosures of personal information have to be both fair and reasonable. So this would, in a way, it would successfully shift the burden of privacy compliance more towards organisations, and it would also potentially address the issue of consent fatigue. But at the same time, the problem we have with it is it isn't completely clear what exactly would be captured as unfair or unreasonable if that type of obligation was introduced. And so, as currently proposed, there's no real, guarantees for industry around uses that have become integral to the functioning of the digital economy. So things like analytics and measurement and audience segmentation, are they fair and reasonable, or at what point are they fair and reasonable, or in what context are they fair and reasonable? There's no real guarantees around that. Thirdly, I just wanted to mention, and we've heard a bit about trusted partnerships today. There will be new requirements on third-party collections. So marketers would either have to collect information directly from an individual unless it's unreasonable or impractical, and if information isn't collected directly, the organisation would need to take reasonable steps to make sure that the personal information has actually been collected fairly and lawfully, and that any relevant consents have been obtained. So that will be a sort of an increased obligation, but it sounds like a lot of you are thinking about that already, so that's great. And the final ones I just really quickly wanted to mention, there are lots. The proposal in relation to privacy defaults. So two options were put forward. The first one seems reasonable and would introduce a requirement that privacy settings should be easily accessible. The other option being considered would be more problematic, and it essentially requires that you have to have the most restrictive privacy settings set it as a default, which I think probably a lot of you know, there's been research around that suggests that would have a really serious impact on advertising. And it's also likely to be inconsistent with consumer expectations in a lot of circumstances. So we are arguing against that one on your behalf. And the last one I thought I'd quickly mention as well is the right to object, which would allow an individual to withdraw their consent to use their personal information at any time, and require the organisation to take reasonable steps to stop collecting, using or disclosing the information, and to inform the individual of the consequences of the objection as well. So the industry, in terms of the industry position, just briefly, IAB did a fairly detailed submission to the review process, and you can find that on our website. Really, the key issue is around balancing privacy on the one hand and maintaining a functioning digital economy on the other. So that's something that we will have to sort of argue for and work with government for, to just make sure that that balance is achieved. It's not going to be easy under this government necessarily, but that's something that is actually really important. And I do think if you look at other jurisdictions around the world, that's really something that people are becoming more and more aware of. Also, we'll just need to bear in mind that, you know, Australia we don't want to leave Australia in a position where our laws are interpreted in a way that is much more restrictive than other jurisdictions. So if you take the discussion paper as a whole and you just implemented everything that was in it, we would have a really, really restrictive position here, and that may well be more restrictive than the GDPR when you look at it in context. So we just want to make sure as well that we get the right set of laws for the Australian context and for our jurisdiction. So just very quickly, some key takeaways. To wrap up, don't stress yet, law reform process is unlikely to be finalised in the next 12 months. While we don't know what the reforms will be at this stage, the direction is definitely towards higher standards and greater organisational responsibility. We are working closely with government to make sure the reforms are practically workable. And in the meantime, we will keep you updated via our newsletter and website. So get in touch anytime if we can be of help. Over to you, Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So now we're going to talk a little bit about future-proofing compliance. Just to add to what Sarah said, another sort of sixth element of this change is that there'll be an increase in powers for people to take direct actions potentially. And one of the things our colleagues have seen around the world is that there's been an increase in claims made by individuals. So that'll be another thing that potentially will increase the risks it already has overseas. So we're in an environment in which a lot of organisations made assessments of risk and made decisions about what risks to take some years ago. And we're now in an environment where people need to regularly revisit those risks because the extent of risk involved in particular decisions is changing because of these multiple factors, and particularly because of privacy law reform being in the offing. Obviously, one of the things everybody's thinking about is future-proofing data. We heard from one of the other speakers this morning about the fact that if you can't use data, then it's not really very useful to you. So having the right notices, having the right consents now may affect what you can do with data in the future. So whilst the changes haven't happened yet, and we expect when they do come in that there'll be a good transition period reflecting the fact that people may actually have to change not just their practices but also their software to implement the changes necessary to shape to this new privacy regime, it is important to start thinking about it now. So key things to be doing and to be thinking about are mapping and understanding relevant practices and possibilities, obviously supporting the IAB's law reform efforts, trying to be as ready as you can for the likely changes, and regularly reviewing notices, terms and conditions and consents. Because we've heard, for example, about systems that will share data across organisations. The bar is lifting in terms of the extent to which notification is expected of those practices and consents expected. Some people may be aware one of the ACCC's recent actions in the last couple of years was against an organisation which it found did not sufficiently clearly disclose its third-party data sharing arrangements and didn't get a clear enough consent. Likewise, some of the ACMA actions we've seen involve them saying your opt-outs aren't easy enough to use. So that bar's lifting, and you just need to understand exactly what it is that you're doing and be thinking in that revised risk matrix when making those decisions. One of the things to focus on, a good example, we were talking about log-on strategies, like getting people to log on and increasing first-party data, which is happening a lot. One of the things, some of the work that we've done has highlighted that there's a growing OAIC expectation, and that's reflected in the guidelines that consent be specific, voluntary and current. And so you need to think about when you're getting these consents, do your users have real choice? Are you making those choices clear, not only to them, but so that if you're later having a conversation with the Privacy Commissioner, it's clear to the Privacy Commissioner? And you need to think, well, are you going to have a consent refresh strategy? What's your time frame around that? Most people have had one of them for some time, but again, it's time to revisit it, because the proposal, one of the proposals in the possible law reforms is to change this from OAIC guidance into being hardwired into the legislation. And you need to think about bundling and also think very carefully about those information flows, what people might not expect, and whether you're telling them about those things. So you need to think like a consumer and the ACCC with your notices, because you're not now just dealing with APP5 and satisfying the Privacy Commissioner. You've also got the ACCC. Another example of a recent ACCC decision or action was, of course, that Google location data matter, and it shows just how vigilant the regulators are now in looking at what you're saying, what you're disclosing, and whether it's going to make sense to consumers. Contracts, again, people just need to keep an eye on those, because your existing precedents may need a refresh. We've, of course, got critical infrastructure legislation as well as these changes that we're talking about today. But you need to be looking at who's wearing the risk that you don't have consents or adequate notices, and think carefully again about those information flows and how big those risks are now. And so you need to be really taking that practical approach and making sure that, that you understand the extent to which you're future-proofing your practices, and that you're planning not just for your current mapping and practices, but also what you think your future mapping might look like. So that as best you can, you're telling people about those data flows, you're getting consents, and you're making that data as valuable as possible for your organisation. Now, I think we're out of time. So thank you, everyone. It's been great to see you today.
Generally excellent content there. We could have an entire day on this topic. And honestly, the amount of work that Sarah goes through in all of this, partly I know this because she has to try and interpret my gibberish. There's a part of it, and having been able to lean on valuable partners in the industry such as Sophie for guidance, I think. Give them another round of applause. Although, actually, I might just hold up, before we go to the panel, just in case there are any specific questions. Now you've walked off, I might make the privacy guys come back. I don't know, maybe it must be a better brand. Here we are, we do have one. Do you mind shouting? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Excellent.
I was wondering if you're also looking at CDR, and because I understand that's going to move just from retail banking to other industries, if that's on your radar, and if so, what are you specifically thinking about in that area?
Yeah, on the radar, I think it's, they have said that, you know, it might, definitely on the radar. The previous government in particular was pretty keen to sort of translate it from the existing, I think, financial services industry only at this point, and into other sectors, including communications, telecommunications, etc. I need to have more of a think about what we can, you know, what our position is as an industry there, but on the radar, and we will sort of see where it goes with this government.
Yeah, that was obviously also just picking up on what Sarah's saying, something that was picked up in the AdTech inquiry sort of and considered. And I thought what was interesting there is that there were really mixed views about whether or not it would translate well into sort of an AdTech environment. And I think they'll be the things that will be carefully scrutinised, obviously the entitlement, for anyone who's not familiar with it, the consumer data right essentially provides consumers with ability to take their data to a new provider. So if they were moving from one SVOD platform to another SVOD platform, potentially in the media context, they could be moving the data relating to their use of that platform when they go. There are complexities, including concerns about whether or not people would give essentially want their data ported and how useful it would be to deal with the competition issues, which were the focus of that particular inquiry. So I think it's a bit up in the air about whether or not it's going to be extended.
Yeah, it's been a hot topic in Europe, data portability. Chris?
Sophie, when do you think people should have started thinking about this?
I think people have been thinking about this for quite a long time. So I think when GDPR came in, that was a bit of a wake-up call to a lot of people. But I think the rubber is really hitting the road. And it may feel like a long time, a couple of years, but it's going to go like that. And particularly if you look at people's technology refresh cycles, like typically people will be refreshing their technology every 6 years or so. Actually, depending on where your technology refresh cycle is, it could be quite urgent, because we've seen in the past, with previous law reforms cycles, that people's technology challenges can be quite significant. So I was just saying essentially that because of the planning that can be involved in just simple things like if you have complex software systems and you need to be capturing consents in a different way and causing systems to react differently to different pieces of data, there's actually quite a lot of work in that. So it's a time where I think it's very important for marketing teams to also be talking to their IT teams about implementation and the life cycle of your IT and your software systems, because actually, even if this law doesn't come, these changes don't come in for say it's 2 years and then there's a 2-year transition period. If you've got a 6-year technology refresh cycle, it could be right now that you need to really be putting those things in place. And that's why I think future-proofing data and systems is really important, and that contingency planning.
Yep, a lot of changes to come, and with it, challenges and opportunities as ever. Thank you so much, both of you, Sophie and Sarah. Thank you very much. I'll ask the esteemed panellists to come up for the panel while I rearrange mics. And there's a couple of points I thought I'd add while everyone moves around a little bit and I press buttons. With regards to the Global Privacy Platform, GPP, and TCF, there's been some questions around both. TCF is a part of GPP, not the other way around, in terms of what you've seen in Europe managing the consent there. And with the Global Accountability Platform, in terms of consistent user experiences wherever they are, there's built into that the ability or capabilities to run audits. I don't quite know what that looks like as yet. We're waiting for the specs to come out, but that's an interesting one for industries, individual businesses, industry bodies, or whoever the capabilities are simply being built, to be able to check that consent signals are being passed and they're being adhered to. Just thought I'd chuck that in. Right, panellists, thank you so much in advance. Well, there's a few topics here that we wanted to touch upon. Hopefully you've all got mics and they're on, and Richard's got his lapel, marvellous. I will ask you to introduce yourselves while I go and get my questions. You start, Moritz. Well done for making it this morning.
Yeah, I was a bit late. Classic virgin at the moment. I'm Moritz. I'm National Sales Director at Audience 360.
Hello, I'm Greg, and I'm the head of biddable of media at Spark.
My name is Richard O'Sullivan. I work for Inmobi, running Australia and New Zealand. And I also look after the APAC agency partnerships.
My name is June Chung. I'm the Regional Director for Oracle Advertising. Hi everyone, Sarah Wallerden from IAB Australia. I'm the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs.
Thank you very much. Quick preemptive applause for the group again. Thank you. So, lovely broad group, and I thought I would start with you, Moritz. Just as we're sort of hearing that level of preparedness to Chris's question and Sophie's response, how prepared do you feel marketers are for what's to come across all of this?
Yeah, I think it's what's interesting, right? We just heard from Sarah and Sophie about kind of we're in the middle of this. So I think we're actually as prepared as we can be. And I'm always surprised at how prepared we actually are. If we think back about 2 or 3 years ago, you know, I would go and talk to brands and I'd have to spend a good amount of time talking about what is third-party data, how is data collected, what are the differences between first and third-party data and all these kind of different things. And now we go in and we talk to brands and, you know, they have a strategy, they've got an idea, they've got people in charge, they've got a vision of where they want to be and they understand how important it is. So we're in the middle of this kind of place, but I think, you know, it's exciting time. I think this is the biggest change since probably mobile entered as a completely new channel. So whilst it is evolving, there's new companies popping up, there's old companies pivoting. So I think we're as ready as we can be at this point, but it's just all about collaboration and working together at this point.
That's great. It's more reassuring than I was expected, to be honest. Yeah, mobile. The year of mobile went for about a decade, eventually happened and then just took over. Now, we've talked a lot, we do talk a lot about this consumer value exchange and the actual process for that, both in terms of plumbing and the experience, has been touched upon actually in a lot of the sessions. But from your perspective, June, and how Oracle sees it, how important is it and how do you kind of define it and what are you looking for it to evolve as?
Wow, that's a big question, isn't it?
I know, yeah, sorry. It's about 4 in 1.
Wow, okay. I was thinking about this as everyone's speaking today, and consumer exchange value is highly important. It's the most important, right? We're in the room, we're publishers, we're marketers, there's regulatory. We can't just think of us two, we need to think of consumer as the centre because there's a lot of change coming in. There's going to be consent requests. We're going to want to ask the data, we want to build our first-party data, but we also have to build it with the consumer's consent in mind. So I want to share a personal story. I was going to talk about the consumer value exchange. So JJ can relate to this. I recently went to David Jones to get my foundation match, all right? So to get my makeup match, I sat down, and before they would match my makeup, they asked for my name, sure. They asked for my email address, sure, right? But then they asked for my date of birth. And that's when my consumer exchange brain was like, wait a minute, I just want to try and build a foundation. Why do you need to know my full date of birth? Right? That's really like Red's laugh. It's like
that's where I'd lie as well, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, I just said, oh, you know what? I'm really privacy security conscious because I'm in this room with these people. And the poor lady's like, oh, we just want to do it to give you a birthday present. I'm like, nah, I don't want to do it. So we kind of try to skip through it. But actually, on the form, she was not allowed to not ask for that information. So the company had decided that in order to try on a bit of foundation, you need their name, their email address, and date of birth in order to pass. So I gave them a fake one. Mm-hmm. But going back to the question of consumer value exchange, as a business, we need to decide where is that balance and be the balance with the consumer rather internally. You know, we need it for analytics, we need it for first-party data. We need to think of the consumer in mind.
Perfect. And it's interesting, I think, to see the consumer experience as a person in the normal world, the experience of logging onto various platforms and re-authenticating and the value you get out of it, whether it's online streaming or other services. I do see it improving, and it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves. Now, Greg, I know that you've been working in a number of key partnerships at Spark Foundry with a number of big brands. So I thought I'd dig into some of those areas and what have been key focus for you with those partnerships and what you've been working on recently.
Sure. So maybe I'll start with like the context, because when we do things with clients, we try to anchor it in 2 different buckets. How do you get yourself ready for a privacy-centered internet, and how do you enable more the activation of first-party data in media? And so for that, we do, I would say, 4 key projects we have at the moment, which is how do we introduce CDP? How do we actually make sure that we can use it alongside an identity solution? The second key project is how do we start testing actually IDs that exist in the market, particularly in programmatic. So make a sense of what's the scale at the moment in Australia, what we can expect from it, how easy it is to onboard the first-party data in a safe way. So that's another thing. The third project, which ended up being harder than expected, is server-to-server integration. So we thought, okay, let's remove the first-party cookie or the pixel out of the equation now and start to connect the data from a client environment to the platform. And actually, it comes with a lot of consideration and risk consideration, risk mitigation. I think someone mentioned earlier, but you involve not just marketing, but you involve legal, you involve IT. So all those projects take effectively more time than expected.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one is we start to explore the use of clean room. I think Richard explained what it is, so I'm not going to rehash. But and where we are in the naming or the type of clean room right now, it's we tend to look and explore walled garden one and work on, again, media execution or media insights, impact on frequency and recency, and to maximize conversion or acquisition. So that's the main project, and then education. So we spend a lot of time educating, reading IAB documents, and trying to
Excellent.
make it digestible for marketers. So that's one piece. And the second is I'm starting to do more and more of education around how we use modeling, predictive modeling for activation as well as measurement. And I think there's a lot, again, to still work on, because, again, we're not working only with marketers, but we're working with business intelligence, with IT, with people that code every day. So translate the marketing into their world is also a big part of the project we work on.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, you don't really know till you get your hands dirty, right? So you start testing generally whether it's true or not. In fact, I was talking to someone before in terms of like roadmaps and vendors, and I love the conversations, but it can be exhausting. And I was saying, like, yeah, maybe 60% exists really, like the rest is just sort of roadmap. And the person said, no, I think it's 80%. Okay, that's harsh. Shoot us in the middle, probably. Thank you. That's very busy. Now, Richard, in Moby's perspective, and I know you cover a lot of the industry, but from a publisher's perspective, what are your what's your guidance or first baby steps for how to look at making the most of any first-party data through either direct ownership, as it were, or potentially partnerships?
I think you can hear me, right?
Yes.
All right. So from our side of things, I think the big thing for any kind of publisher is that they've got it a little bit harder sometimes than the advertiser, because if the advertiser is looking for one identity partner, the publisher has to be able to accept that data partner and the other 50 or 100 that may come down the line. So the first thing is understand your own data that you have within your organization, and that can obviously be on device, which is starting to get a lot more traction at the moment, because that means it won't get commingled. The data stays on the device itself. It does get utilized. That's starting to get a lot of traction. I think first-party data is getting a lot of traction, but scale is obviously going to be something that comes in. I know you're going to mention seller-defined audiences there as well.
Might do.
The third one kind of coming into that space is obviously going to be around contextual. You know, that's going to produce a lot of data that can still mingle in with that other information. You've got universal identifiers. So universal identifiers, whether that be TTD's UID, or, sorry, too many acronyms, or the many other kind of solutions coming out from LiveRamp with Ramp ID, etc. So there's a number of different sources of where that data can come from. And it doesn't just have to come from advertising, it can come from earned, owned, or paid media. But making sure you've got the tech, firstly, identifying the data. Secondly, making sure you've got the tech that's able to utilize that data. But it goes back to something June had mentioned, is at the end of the day, your relationship is to the consumer, which should be at the heart of it. And what is that consumer exchange? What is that balance? And there's a study, I think it was Ad Perceptions in the UK, just came out, 60% of companies now are starting to push loyalty schemes, promotions, newsletters, because they're going to get more of that first-party data coming in that they can then utilize. So that's quite a big number already. But the value exchange is the core. If you're a BVOD player, you know, your consumer exchange will be different than if you're a publisher, than if you're many other things. And making sure that what you're asking for is not to the extent of the makeup for all your demographic details. So the big thing around recommendations then is start to build privacy by design, because it might be that the law changes in 2 years, but the reality is the landscape's already changed. Cookies are gone on Firefox. 72% of device IDs on Apple are already gone at the moment. So there's a huge competitive edge that can be leveraged right now, let alone the fact it's being pre-built for the future. I think the second thing in that space is also there's a lot of data that's being collected. The type of identifiers will change over time. But the key thing to remember is that you're going to have to start to train your probabilistic models on a lower volume of data set. So there's going to be there's less data that you're going to be able to run it across, which then comes up with ethical considerations. Because if that contains sensitive information, then you build a probabilistic model off the back of it. It's going to extrapolate information that could be wildly inaccurate or wildly unethical. And that really does have to come, especially if ethnicity, orientation, and that stuff is built into the data. So the other thing to be mindful of is that unfortunately not one of these solutions will work on its own. They're all going to be a mosaic. And depending on the footprint that each publisher has and what they start with, the results will be very different overall.
Yeah, great answer. And yeah, Richard chipped one over to me there in terms of the seller-defined audiences, the SDA standards, which I'm massively excited about. So the ability to safely, because the first-party data remains unlinked, as it were, for sellers or publishers to surface defined audiences based upon both standardized IAB Tech Lab taxonomies, but also customized taxonomies, and plug and play with Prebid. Be able to surface that for, say, PMP purchase by buyers is just such a simple, elegant option for the responsible addressability moving forwards.
JJ, can I just second the loyalty side of things?
Yeah.
Stephen from Car Sales mentioned, he hinted, we're talking about first-party data today, but they're going to be a whole pool of unauthenticated users. So how are we going to convert them? I think that's going to be phase 2 of our story. You got your first-party strategy foundation set up, but with all these people we don't know anything about, how do we convince them to share data with us?
That's right, absolutely, which sort of goes back to the first question you answered. And that's the reason we wanted to build out the contextual targeting handbook, whatever it was, 18 months ago, and then more recently the ID one to sort of, to Richard's point there around some of the requirements, because there's a lot of explaining to be done. I was tempted to crack out some slides on seller-defined audiences, but we're already running late, I'm sure. Now, Sarah, we heard a bit from you and Sophie around experiences in other markets and other environments, and we know the US, it's varying even by state with some of the proposals that are coming out, but can you dig into that a little more for us?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, what's going on around the world, I'm particularly interested in, I guess, the GDPR and the EU and the UK. I think what's happening there is really relevant in the context of, where we're up to in our law reform process and a number of the obligations that are in the GDPR that we're sort of considering, should we or shouldn't we sort of implement them here in our law? And that's essentially what the US has done. The US has taken some of those more restrictive GDPR consumer-based rights and implemented them in the Californian law at least, and then we'll see where they get to with the federal law, but that probably won't happen anytime soon. But I think in terms of lessons, I think it's probably really important to bear in mind there's been a lot of discussion about the pendulum having swung too far in favour of privacy protection, and sort of forgetting about the importance of just making sure that the digital economy can continue to function as well. So issues have come out of the UK, out of Europe around things like opt-in fatigue, things like small and medium-sized businesses struggling with compliance, and generally just issues around, well, if there's a decreased amount of advertising, then how are free services actually funded? So it's a pretty fundamental issue. So I think all of those things are really important for us to think about, and the UK I keep talking about because I just think it's really interesting that they have identified these issues and they're looking for ways to just you know, keep the flavour of the GDPR and make sure everything is being, you know, privacy is being appropriately protected, but at the same time, just making it a little bit easier for businesses to comply, and particularly with things like, you know, just making it really clear in law. We haven't actually seen the legislation come out of the UK yet, I should say, but I'm hoping when it does come out, you know, it'll be clear in law that things like data processing, measurement, analytics, it's just going to be, you know, it's going to be clear that those things can continue without additional notifications and consents and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's probably...
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, isn't it? They're going rogue, the Brits, again.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll be over there next month, actually, so I'll be popping in to see them. But we're in close touch. Sarah's probably more excited than I am about it, but, you know, we'll keep an eye on it. But it's interesting to see what happened in California, because CCPA was basically a big do not sell button, boink, which means that you can't do anything with it. So I personally was predicting that it'd be a really high percentage rate, but it's not. It's like 2% at most, which I'm kind of amazed by. But anyway.
Yeah. The US is sort of all over the place a bit with their proposal on, you know, the ban on behavioural advertising as well. But, you know, there's a few things going on that I think actually won't make it into legislation. So
yeah. The US all over the place. Fair enough. Yeah. No comment. God, we're live online anyway. So coming back to you, Moritz. So it's easy enough to talk about, and I was trying to talk earlier, my sort of preamble around ecosystems and closed and open and there being interdependence, but ultimately not everyone has access to scale and quality of first-party data necessarily, and even those that do may want to have interactions that aren't so reliant on kind of secure plumbing, as it were, which is a rather ridiculous phrase, but I hope you know what I mean. So what are there in terms of options that are more future-proof that both sellers and buyers can consider in and around first-party data?
Yeah, I think on the future bit, the future really relies on innovation. It relies on, you know, people in this room, people online, this industry to innovate, to work with Google, maybe Apple, who knows what they're going to do, but work together. And I mean, Greg mentioned, you know, all these ID solutions that have started coming up as a way to kind of work together as well and collaborate with really smart companies. At Audience 360, we've just completed our proof of concept with ID5 as well. One of many that can plug into, you know, UID and all these other kind of IDs that are popping up out of Europe. But the real key to that is that, you know, first-party data is accessible to most people now. You know, Greg's working with his clients around kind of educating them and making them more accessible. But it is really available for everyone at the end of the day. So kind of going back to why we're talking about this, I think it's important for brands to revert back to that kind of privacy message. Why are we getting rid of third-party cookies and not looking to use them in the way that we are or have been? It's for that transparency. It's for that privacy first. It's for that user compliance. It's for all those good things that we want in advertising. And the only way to really address that at the core is to work with trusted partners. Work with brands that, you know, you can genuinely work with and work alongside with, that are going to guide you. They're going to be experts in their field and complement rather than compete. And I mean, luckily there's things like the IAB data transparency label that's going to make it a lot easier for people to understand where audiences are coming from, how are they built, what are the privacy compliance, you know, that are being followed. What are all these different kind of things? So personally, I'm excited about, you know, the IAB data transparency label because it obviously works in my favour because we're already very transparent. But I think it's great for the industry, and I think it's going to be really good for brands as well to collaborate with trusted partners.
Yeah, and a massive call out to Moritz and A360. You got on board really early with Data Label when there was sort of a version of it that was more standalone than it is now. It's encompassed within the fuller set of data transparency standards that includes ID sources.json, which is just a nerdy way of saying, a la programmatic transparency, in real time you can declare your relationships, which ID vendors are you compatible with, without having to, you know, lift the lid in a hard way. And the fact that you've got the partnership in play between Carsales and Audience 360 is a beautiful sort of symbiotic thing. You can just lean on Stephen to do all the hard work, right?
Yeah, easy done.
There you go. Now, talking again about future evolutions, June, what, nice broad question, what in the space, particularly given the scale of the business behind you, what is there that you're particularly excited about over the next 12 to 18 months? Or is that too far away? That's like 10
I'm going to
years,
say
isn't
many
it?
things I'm excited about.
All right,
That's
okay.
So I'm going to start with now, for those of you who are in the room, consumer and privacy being the centre. I think you guys are the champion for businesses, and that's why you're here today. But it's going to take us a lot of education to let our company knows, organisation knows, the government to know, what is it that we do that's positive from a consumer perspective. So I love the evolution that we're putting consumer and privacy at heart. We may be forced a little, but we're doing it. All right. A lot of people have mentioned CDP, so I'm excited that brands are taking it on. Agencies are working with brands, and tech partners are talking about CDPs. Connecting that holy grail, that first-party data from a consumer, from a marketing, acquisition, sales, but post-sales, that service, that end-to-end, that loyalty building, that conversation with your customer is going to be so much more important. So that's CDP and those who have first-party data, but there's going to be a lot of brands and marketers in the room that don't have first-party data. So what I'm most excited about is how us as an industry are looking at ways to augment the little data that we have into accessible data for those that don't have first-party. Yun talked about machine learning. I think Maritz mentioned it as well. So that's going to be a huge part. You mentioned Context Handbook. Context is been around for a very long time, but I'm very excited to see how contextual providers are augmenting the way they categorise content using first-party referral URLs or whatever data there is. So that evolution of us working together as an industry, that's what's making me excited.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, Greg, in and around the projects that you're working on and the 478 projects you seem to have running at any one time, we've seen, and we actually recently launched a dedicated council in and around talent and careers, just because of the sheer pressure in that area. So how are you managing to retain, maintain, hire resource for all the activities you've got going on at Spark?
Loaded question,
yeah,
to be honest.
Slightly.
I think, I know it's going to sound super cliche, but the first thing we do is trying to nurture the people we have. And so we do that by, being transparent where the career is, how it can map out, what's the next evolution, how they're doing in their job. Not that we overlooked before, but now we pay particular attention to that. I also empower all team members to have those conversations. So that's a big aspect for us. The second aspect is accelerating their training in a way. So that doesn't mean that we push them too hard. It's just you expose people to things they don't have exposure before. Like, for instance, data and privacy before, and even 5 years ago, you wouldn't necessarily talk about this in your day-to-day job. Now you really pay attention to those things, need to be trained on it. I think those, having a regular conversation, being exposed to things that you're not usually exposed to, that already, I think, play a large contribution to retain people. And then the second aspect, because there's no magic trick about hiring and finding people, we work across the globe. So I have, my team is at some point was spread about 5 different time zones. So what we do for that and to make it a success is we break down the way we work. So we introduce more asynchronous ways of working, try to even break down things that we used to do and break down on multiple tasks so someone can work across the globe when the other one is doing other things. So yeah, we're trying to do and accommodate when the situation is improving.
Fantastic, yeah. And then one area we did look at, and I know there's still conversations going on, is sort of random Europeans like you and I, right? How do you get the migrant visa aspect whilst you're a global business, like trying to move them internally and across has been difficult of late.
Yeah.
But I know there's
patience as well.
Yep. So actually, I've heard this term come up twice today, Richard, and it's actually one I don't like. So this is another loaded question. So zero-party data. What the bloody hell is it? And
talking about a loaded question you had. Zero-party data's come up. As an industry, we love acronyms. We love coming up with things that don't exist. We complicate ourselves, let alone regulators. But zero-party data, by definition, is first-party data. Effectively, the only major difference is instead of offering, let's say, value. So, if a publisher offers a newsletter, the person wants the newsletter, therefore they provide the data. It's effectively the reverse of that, where in, let's say, survey. So Moby's got a product called Pulse. We work with a lot of advertisers where they might run the survey after the advertising campaign. So after the video is shown, they'll see 2 questions, like a brand lift survey. They're asked those questions. Now, that's all confidential, but if they're then asked the question, if you consent to the use of this data being passed to the advertiser, you will get an instant gratification of X, Y, or Z. So in those instances where the data is proactively communicated and shared, and again, I do agree with Janice on this. I think it's just another word we don't need. The key definition for me is it's just another subset of first-party data. So if a publisher's trying to do newsletters and get your data, or offering surveys, it's just the same information by a different means. And if first-party data isn't enough, you can imagine what percentage of that zero-party data is.
Yeah. I mean, there are some interesting future models coming where there can be declared credit and actual value to your attention that can be accredited and made up with some sort of cryptocurrency or whatever, and I was making it up. That's fine. It could be like the open consensual value exchange, and I'm sure there'll be arguments to the opposite.
Just to finish it, the gratification also changes by market. So we do a lot with one of the world's largest CPG clients in Philippines, and the gratification is very simply $2, but they can redeem it there and then. There's no give us all your information and we'll get you an email in a week's time. And the important thing is to have the fulfillment as high as possible.
And that's hard cash, is it?
It's a gratification on something like maybe an equivalent of an Uber Eats or something like that over there. But it's only $2 is what's being traded for that. And for those in the room that know the value of data, it can have value. In Australia, obviously, for $2, people wouldn't do much. You'd have to figure to do it a bit differently.
But the model of free mobile connections that we've seen in some markets take off, but actually the implementation is very hard, regardless of some of the bigger companies where the pointer was fingered, the fingers were pointed, but the actual product implementation of that, I know with some of the ad serving at the back of it, was incredibly hard to implement.
Actually, I thought about the zero party, and I just think that one day, okay, maybe in the future, when you go to your digital self and you actually own your profile and the data linked to it.
Yes.
And as you are in the metaverse or whatever, you actually trading your data.
Yep.
And you own it, and it's not someone else or company owning it and trading it.
Yep.
It's you trading it in the digital environment. I think that, but we're like 15, 20 years.
Yeah, but with the Second Life, we were doing that 15 years ago.
There you go, yes.
I was really badly, but anyway. So do we have any questions for this group? We are at time. Tiff's giving me the signal. I probably went over time ages ago. We do have one. I'm sorry, we haven't got a mic, but I can throw it at you.
That's okay. Hi, Sarah from ABC. So you talked a lot about education internally and between ourselves, so to uplift that awareness of privacy. Visa, when they were developing their consent framework, they did a lot of research around why people give data when they choose not to and so on. What they found is that half is about whether we'll keep it safe, but the other half is about an understanding of how it's used. So people have a higher level understanding of how digital media works, are more likely to give their information. So I think we all as an industry have a vested interest in uplifting that understanding with the community generally. And given our practices are all very similar, do you think we could do that better as a collective?
I might jump in here because it's a bit of a passion topic of mine. I kind of always look at the internet as a free. Well, it's not a free thing, but most consumers think it is free. If you talk to, if I talk to my friends outside of this industry, they go, "Well, the internet's free. I can get everything for free," but it's not free. It's advertising paying for it. So, it's us. We're making the internet free. If we want to go real altruistic with it. So absolutely, we need to do a better job of just putting it in very simple terms of what is the value exchange. I think, even getting people, paying people with Uber Eats vouchers is probably almost too far to what most people are willing to do. If we're looking at a website like car sales, people go there to take an action. And if they very clearly understand that them going there and their safe use of data is going to help pay for that website, I think there's going to be a broad understanding of the general population that, we can all work within that framework.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it from a different angle because the privacy regulatory is asking for consent, but we're kind of pushing back, and as an industry, we need to keep consent simple because it needs to be 1 or 2 sentences. And I always sprout this stat from an Apple app tracking point of view, allowing a company to track you across multiple apps. Globally, 46% of people have said yes. in Australia is 37%. So both Apple and certain businesses with apps are doing it the right way. They're keeping it simple, doing the value exchange to go, hey, we're tracking you across multiple apps so that we can show you better discounts or, retarget you, but in a consumer-friendly way that allows people to say yes. What's not working is the GDPR, where you go to a web page and there's 5 paragraphs and you're just clicking away. That's not working. We need to really push this regulatory change with the government to go, we know what we do in the industry, we will be transparent, but we need to keep his consent simple.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that on the education piece, so important, and it's definitely on IAB's radar in terms of making sure, consumers, but also importantly regulators and government understand the importance of digital advertising to funding content. The internet is not free, so we are definitely sort of doing work on that side of things. I think there is a lot of work to be done, but it's on our radar.
And it's not going to be built for us, right? We have to work on that collaboratively together as an industry in conjunction with government. That's the thing, that there's a bit of a sit back and hope that it'll just be built. It won't. We've got to figure it out. Actually, there's a British site, I would say this, called the Daily Mash. It's actually Scottish. It's like a British Onion, right? And he's bloody brilliant. He used to be a senior editor at Scotsman, I think. And his site, with all the disclaimers and everything, is literally like, here's something you don't care about, you just want it to go away, and when you hit the consent button, it just goes, whatever. You just click it. And that's actually legally covered. He's got the proper privacy policy, but he realised he just had to have it in the way, anyway.
Yeah. And I should just quickly add as well, I mean, there's a lot of importance in terms of, that government wants things to be free for people, because otherwise they've got a problem on their hands in terms of people having to buy subscriptions for everything. So there are actually really important public policy reasons for having free services on the internet. So, yeah.
Yep. But then, we could end up, the people become the product and all of that. So it's just striking the balance. Responsible addressability. Right, everyone, thank you so much. We are at time, in fact, over. Classic me, I'm never on time. We do have our esteemed chair of the board, Nicole, closing the session, but for now, a round of applause for the panellists.
No, a lot of people have to let go, so I'm only going to take 60 seconds, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of the speakers today. There is so much happening in this landscape at the moment, and I know in my role at Seven, I have access to some amazing resources, and you can't stay educated enough. So I think to the Data Council and JJ, thank you for today. It was awesome. To everyone online, I think Tiff said we've got about 65 or 70 online, and to those of you who braved it this morning, I think my car said it was 8 degrees at 8:30. So thank you for joining. It makes such a difference to have all of you in person, and I think today was really about actionable insights. We talk about that a lot, and I think today was really about sort of doing a mix of the practical but also the theory, because I think there's so much we can do, but the things we do that make a difference to the ecosystem and continue to grow advertisers' value in digital is really important. So the next event is July 5 here. It is gaming. It is an afternoon. It is super fun. No doubt Ricky Chinanan is going to be a big part of it, I imagine, Gay. So for anyone who knows Ricky knows that it will be full of energy, heaps of case studies, lots of networking. So please come along if that interests you, and some of us will be sticking around for some tea and coffee. So see you outside. Thanks all.
That's it. Thank you very much. Get on out there and have your coffee and cake.